Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: U.S. strikes 2 more Houthi targets in Yemen. Alibaba's South Asian arm gets new CEO in latest exec shuffle. Rice scores 16 as Boise State beats Fresno State 72-68. Petraeus posts second ever triple-double in Air Force history as Falcons dismantle UNLV. Myanmar's rebels are gaining ground. U.S. strikes 2 more Houthi targets in Yemen. New York Times. The U.S. has resumed airstrikes against Houthi anti-ship missiles in Yemen, citing imminent threats to merchant vessels and Navy ships. The strikes, the ninth in 2 weeks, followed larger military operations against 9 Houthi-controlled sites in Yemen by the U.S. and UK. While the U.S. argues that the strikes have weakened the Houthi arsenal, others suggest the group is biding its time. President Biden has indicated his support for a limited air campaign, enabling U.S. forces to hit Houthi targets as they emerge. Alibaba's South Asian arm gets new CEO in latest exec shuffle. Bloomberg. Alibaba's South Asian online retailer Daraz Group has appointed James Dong, head of Alibaba's Southeast Asian arm Lazada Group, as its new CEO. Dong will replace Daraz founder Bjarke Mikkelsen and will oversee the company's operations in addition to his existing duties. The move comes as Alibaba faces intense competition in the online retail sector, particularly in Asia, and as Lazada cuts jobs to compete with rivals such as Shopee and TikTok Shop in Southeast Asia's e-commerce market. Alibaba acquired Daraz in 2018 as part of its international expansion strategy. Rice scores 16 as Boise State beats Fresno State 72-68. Associated Press. Boise State defeated Fresno State with a score of 72-68 in a Mountain West Conference basketball game. Max Rice and Chibuzo Agbo each scored 16 points for Boise State, while Donovan Yap led Fresno State with 17 points. Agbo's three-pointer in the second half secured the win for Boise State. Petraeus posts second ever triple-double in Air Force history as Falcons dismantle UNLV. Associated Press. Air Force defeated UNLV 90-58 in a Mountain West Conference game on Tuesday. Ritas Petraeus recorded a triple-double with 18 points, 13 rebounds, and 11 assists, becoming only the second player in Air Force history to achieve this feat. Ethan Taylor also scored 22 points for the Falcons. Air Force dominated the game, leading from start to finish, and finished 14 for 28 from three-point range. Justin Webster led UNLV with 14 points. Air Force will next face Fresno State, while UNLV will play against San Jose State. Myanmar's rebels are gaining ground. Foreign Affairs. Since the military coup in Myanmar in 2021, rebel groups have been launching an offensive against the military junta. Led by the Three Brotherhood Alliance, a coalition of ethnic armies, rebels have made significant gains in the northern Shan state. They have taken control of many towns and trade routes, putting pressure on the junta. Other resistance groups, both independent and led by the National Unity Government, have also been spurred into action. The junta is struggling to maintain control in various regions, and the country risks breaking apart, according to Myanmar's president. The military's violent response to the rebels, including aerial strikes against civilians, has further weakened its position. The army is losing soldiers and facing low morale, while the resistance groups are showing resilience, coordination, and tactical innovation. There are hopes that Myanmar could transition to a federal democracy with equal rights for all communities if the resistance is successful. However, the resistance also faces challenges, including interethnic tensions and the entrenchment of drugs and illicit trade. The outcome will depend on the ability of the resistance groups to negotiate settlements among themselves and ensure national reconciliation. Myanmar's future is uncertain, but the military junta is on the back foot and the resistance groups have made significant gains. The resilience and coordination of the rebels have surprised many observers, and there is hope that Myanmar could transition to a federal democracy. However, challenges remain, and the outcome will depend on the ability of the resistance groups to overcome divisions and work towards national reconciliation. What's BDS, the movement to boycott Israel with a new social media following? Washington Post. Opponents of Israel's war in the Gaza Strip have called for boycotts of companies they claim support Israeli policies, and have drawn millions of views on social media. Customers, particularly in the Middle East, have refrained from patronizing companies like Starbucks and McDonald's. The calls have dovetailed with an almost 2-decade-old movement called BDS for boycott, divestment, sanctions that protests Israel's actions in the Palestinian territories by targeting businesses and institutions accused of aiding violations of Palestinian rights. Over 18 years, BDS has pressured some companies to end investment in Israel, and others to pull operations out of the occupied West Bank. But the BDS movement's overall effect on Israel's economy is hard to conclusively measure and could be minimal, analysts say. UN chief warns Israel's rejection of two-state solution threatens global peace. South China Morning Post. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned that Israel's rejection of a two-state solution will prolong the conflict and encourage extremism. Speaking to the UN Security Council, Guterres said the right of the Palestinian people to an independent state must be recognized, and that the alternative of a one-state solution would be inconceivable. He also highlighted the risks of the conflict spreading to other countries in the region. The U.S. State Department's Uzra Zeya reiterated the Biden administration's support for a two-state solution, while Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, accused the U.S. of providing carte blanche for the collective punishment of Palestinians. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, rejected a ceasefire and claimed Iran was the root cause of the conflict. Iran's foreign minister, Hossein Amirabdollahian, warned Israel that it would not destroy Hamas, and called for an end to the genocide in Gaza. The Palestinian foreign minister, Riyad al-Maliki, accused Israel of genocide, ethnic cleansing or apartheid and called for Palestinian freedom. The French foreign minister, Stéphane Séjourné, warned that the conflict could escalate further, while Turkey's foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, said that the claim that the war was about Israel's security was unconvincing. Jordan's foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, called for Israel to be held accountable for war crimes. Fear of famine in parts of Ethiopia grows. BBC. Famine is threatening parts of Ethiopia, with the northern Tigray region at the epicenter. The region has not yet recovered from the recent war and is now facing severe drought. Reports of hundreds of children dying of starvation are emerging, and the crisis is unfolding earlier than expected. The Ethiopian government denies that a famine is imminent, but veterans of relief operations are comparing the situation to the 1984 famine that killed up to 1 million people. The UN estimates that over 20 million Ethiopians are in need of food aid, with a third receiving assistance. Tigray is particularly alarming, with 3.5 million people needing aid for the entire year. The main cause of the crisis is the war, which reduced Tigray to extreme poverty. The fighting resulted in destruction, displacement, and a siege that halted trade and aid. Additionally, the rains failed, exacerbating the food crisis. Last year, aid staff uncovered massive schemes of stealing food aid, further undermining efforts to address the crisis. Aid assistance needs to be rapidly increased to prevent a catastrophe. Modi rides religious wave in bid to clinch third term in power. Yahoo! Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has blurred the lines between religion and politics by opening a controversial Hindu temple in the city of Ayodhya. The move challenges the country's secular tradition and has shown Modi's unquestioned dominance just months before an election. Critics of the Prime Minister say the temple project has marginalized Muslims and other minorities, and led to the erosion of India's tradition of secularism and pluralism. Muslims account for around 14% of India's population, but a survey by the Pew Research Center found 2/3 of both Muslims and Hindus considered themselves to be very different from one another. ISW, Kremlin may allow some anti-war opposition to frame Russian presidential election as referendum on war. Yahoo! The Kremlin may allow for some anti-war opposition from Russian presidential candidates, aiming to frame the controlled outcome of Russian President Vladimir Putin's re-election as a positive referendum on the war in Ukraine, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, wrote in its assessment on January 23. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, coming to you from the 6 Degrees World with your daily dose of news. Let's dive right into it. In Yemen, the U.S. has resumed airstrikes against Houthi anti-ship missiles, citing threats to merchant vessels and Navy ships. Meanwhile, Alibaba's South Asian arm, Daraz Group, has a new CEO as the company faces intense competition in the online retail sector. In sports news, Boise State and Air Force had impressive victories in their respective basketball games. Moving on to Myanmar, rebel groups have been gaining ground against the military junta, and there is hope for a transition to a federal democracy. The BDS movement, which calls for a boycott of companies allegedly supporting Israeli policies, has gained traction on social media. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that Israel's rejection of a two-state solution threatens global peace. Famine is looming in parts of Ethiopia, particularly in the Tigray region, due to war and severe drought. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has opened a controversial Hindu temple, blurring the lines between religion and politics. Lastly, the Kremlin may allow some anti-war opposition in the Russian presidential election to frame it as a positive referendum on the war in Ukraine. Now, let's analyze these stories. In Yemen, the U.S. strikes against Houthi targets continue, but it's uncertain if this will completely weaken the group. Alibaba's appointment of a new CEO for Dara's group shows the company's commitment to staying competitive in the online retail sector. Boise State and Air Force had impressive wins in their basketball games, proving that they are forces to be reckoned with in their conference. In Myanmar, rebel groups are gaining ground, but challenges remain for a successful transition to a federal democracy. The BDS movement's social media following is growing, but its overall impact on Israel's economy is unclear. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warns about the consequences of Israel rejecting a two-state solution, emphasizing the need for a peaceful resolution. Famine in Ethiopia is a dire situation that requires urgent aid assistance to prevent a catastrophe. Prime Minister Modi's opening of a Hindu temple raises concerns about the marginalization of minorities and the erosion of secularism in India. Lastly, the Kremlin's potential manipulation of the Russian presidential election raises questions about the true nature of the outcome. Now, let's hear from you, our wonderful viewers. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions or insights to share? Let's have a lively discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.